John, can you tell us a little bit about millennials? You know, how are millennials coping with the stress that's due to their financial difficulties and the financial situation they found themselves in?
So it's interesting because millennials, I guess the younger generation, probably about 25, with you know, the typical debts that you see like credit card and whatnot. But then they also have a portion of their debt that's attributed to student loans, and the student loan debt is causing some concern. We've seen tuition rates increase pretty significantly over the student loan. Like, for instance, Barack Obama was 44 when he finished paying his student loan off, and he became president at 48. So it just goes to show you that there's other debt out there that can lead to some of this mental stress, specifically on the millennial generation. And they're also the generation that's not really working long term anywhere. They seem to be like the contract generation, I guess, where there isn't the like, I guess, my parents' generation, where you're at the same company for 30 years. That's kind of come and gone. And now the poor millennials that come out of school saddled with the student loans, saddled with mortgages, car loans, and credit card debt, and then they have the concern about, you know, not having you know, locked in employment going forward. So it's definitely something, you know, a different part of you know, our job, but we are seeing in that generation as well.
Certainly. Randy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, John, you make some very good points there, and I would agree with your assessment on student loans and with things like gig employment, for example, too. There just isn't the stability there with employment that maybe the older generations had in the past. You don't typically tend to see the 20, 30-year jobs anymore, and the benefits that surround that. So when you don't have benefits and suddenly then you're displaced from your job, then you have a great deal of stress. I mean, millennials too are gathering their information from different sources, right? And they tend to seek advice from different places than older generations did. So, for example, social media channels are a huge source of their contacts, right? So really a lot depends too, I think, on how they were raised. Did their parents, for example, and siblings talk about money issues when they were growing up, right? So I think that's a huge factor on how a millennial make decisions and deal with stress. If they talked about money in their household, and their parents explained the meaning of money and budgeting, and that money doesn't grow on trees, right? That everything has a cost, right? I think those we're seeing in our offices are managing better. Sometimes things just happen that are out of their control, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. You can be the best possible planner you can be, but stuff happens, right? Sometimes. So, but I think where they came from, I think, is a huge difference, and also who they surround themselves with, right? Because to some extent, you can pick and choose who you hang around with. If you're hanging around with lavish spenders, as a millennial, chances are you're going to be a spender too. You have a certain peer pressure to keep up to, right? So, but if you're surrounded by people that are watching every cent that they spend and so on, chances are that that'll rub off on you, right? So I think how they deal with those kinds of things, where they've been, who they hang around with, all determine how they cope with stress going forward, right? So.
And I would agree with you both. I know I've found I've met with debtors, you know, through our practice, and a common thread is, well, you know, my parents didn't teach me anything about money management. My parents just got us everything we asked for. They just put it on their credit card. We never knew whether they were able to pay it or not. All we knew is that if we asked for it, we got it, and we weren't educated. And I think part of the issue as well is that if it's not being taught at home, it's also not really being taught that well in the school system. At least here in Manitoba, I would say that kids that take the high level math spend one unit, like one class, on money management. The kids that maybe take the lower levels might have that as a whole unit or a several, over several classes where they actually look at budgeting, they look at investigating what it costs to rent an apartment, to buy a car, what do you do to open up a bank account, filing your taxes, why do you have to do that, when do you do that, how do you do that? Those are life skills that I think everybody should be taught at school, because it's either going to reinforce what's being taught at home, or if it's not being taught at home, which for the most part I think is the case, unless your parent is a licensed insolvency trustee like our children's parents are, I think that there's a disservice being done to the upcoming generation, and add the pressure of keeping up with their friends if they're hanging out with the high rollers, or just the whole I see, I want, I buy. I want it, I deserve it, I'm going to have it. I'll worry about how I'm going to pay for it later. And we see the end result of that in our office as they're sitting there wringing their hands, just, I don't know how this happened, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for it anymore.